There is a part of Nicaragua where, if you show up speaking Spanish, many people may not fully understand you. That is not a joke or an exaggeration made for a viral video. It covers nearly half of this Central American country, a region so isolated and so culturally distinct that many Nicaraguans from the other side of the country have never even been there. People speak Mosquito, English-based Creole, Garifuna, and Mayangna, and that is only the beginning of what Nicaragua has hidden inside its borders. A lake filled with sharks, an island formed by two volcanoes, a canyon that even most Nicaraguans did not know existed until just over 20 years ago. Today, we are counting down 10 verified facts about a country that most people reduce to a news headline, even though its people, culture, and geography are far richer than you might imagine. And I am warning you now, the number one fact is so surprising that many people assume it must be made up when they first hear it. But it is completely real, so stay until the end. And if you love discovering how people live in some of the most fascinating corners of the planet, subscribe right now so you do not miss any of these journeys. Fact number 10. The canyon no one knew existed. Let us begin with something that sounds impossible in the 21st century. A massive, spectacular natural landmark that the scientific community did not even know existed until 2004. We are talking about Somoto Canyon in northern Nicaragua, close to the border with Honduras. Picture towering rock walls rising between 500 and 820 feet, creating a narrow passage that stretches for more than 4 miles. Running through it is the Coco River, the longest river in Central America. Geologists estimate that the rocks are between 5 and 15 million years old, making this one of the oldest geological formations in the region. The fascinating part is that people in the nearby communities had always known about it. They called it Naman Cambre, or simply the Narrow Passage, and used it to swim, fish, and cross from one side to the other. But to the outside world, the canyon simply did not exist. It appeared on no tourist map and in no major geological study. That changed when a group of Czech geologists visiting the area came across the landscape almost by accident. One of them described it as something that suddenly opened before their eyes, as though the Earth had kept a secret for millions of years just to reveal it at that moment. Since then, the Nicaraguan government has declared it a national monument and even given it a place of honor. Its image appears on the 50 Cordoba banknote. Today, visitors can travel through the canyon by boat, swim between its stone walls, or rappel down from above and experience the same sense of wonder those scientists felt just over 2 decades ago. What was once a secret shared only by residents of Somoto and Madriz has become one of northern Nicaragua's most popular adventure tourism destinations. Local guides now make a living showing visitors a landscape their grandparents already knew by heart. It is proof that even in a world filled with satellites and digital maps, some places still resist being fully discovered. Fact number 9. The second largest rainforest in the Americas. When people think about the largest rainforest in the Americas, everyone thinks of the Amazon. And they are right. It is number 1, without question. But very few people know that one of the largest forests in the Western Hemisphere lies in northern Nicaragua, the Bosawas Biosphere Reserve. We are talking about a vast expanse of humid tropical forest covering roughly 2 million hectares, or about 7,700 square miles. That is approximately 15% of Nicaragua's entire territory. To put that into perspective, the forest is so enormous that crossing it on foot would take several days. Bosawas was recognized by UNESCO as a biosphere reserve in 1997, and for good reason. Jaguars, harpy eagles, tapirs, and giant anteaters still live there, along with hundreds of bird species and an extraordinary variety of insects. It is quite literally one of Central America's last great green lungs that has not been completely urbanized. But the most fascinating part is not only the wildlife. It is also the people who live there. Bosawas is the ancestral homeland of the Mayangna and Mosquito indigenous peoples. These communities have protected this territory for generations, carrying knowledge about its plants, animals, and forest cycles that no biology textbook could ever fully teach. Can you imagine living surrounded by that much untouched nature, with no cities nearby and no traffic noise, only the sounds of the rainforest? Tell me in the comments whether you think you could adapt to a life that far removed from everything we normally call civilization. The reserve does, however, face a major challenge: conservation. Every year, thousands of hectares are lost to logging and cattle ranching advancing from outside the reserve. Some of that pressure comes from farming families searching for fertile land, while other people arrive simply to seize territory. The indigenous communities living inside the reserve have denounced this destruction for years. To them, Bosawas is not merely a protected area drawn on a map. It is their home, their food supply, and the place where their people have lived for generations. So the future of one of the largest rainforests in the Americas is not guaranteed. Much of it depends on whether the rights and territory of the people who have always cared for it are respected. Fact number 8. Soccer is not the national obsession. Here is a fact that surprises almost everyone visiting Nicaragua for the first time, especially travelers arriving from another Latin American country. Across most of the region, soccer is king. There is no debate. But in Nicaragua, baseball holds the crown. And this is not just casual enthusiasm. Baseball is a passion felt in every neighborhood, every town, and every street corner, with enough open space to throw a ball. The story dates back to 1901, when the country's first baseball club was founded in Managua. By 1924, the sport had already been declared the national game, and it has never surrendered that position. Nicaragua has its own professional league, with teams representing places such as León, Chinandega, Managua, Masaya, and Granada. The game is also deeply rooted along the Caribbean coast, especially in cities like Bluefields and Puerto Cabezas. One of the most beloved figures in Nicaraguan baseball history is Dennis Martinez, a pitcher who threw a perfect game in Major League Baseball, something only a tiny number of pitchers have ever accomplished. His name became a symbol of national pride. In recent years, Nicaragua's national team has qualified for consecutive World Baseball Classic tournaments, competing against baseball powerhouses such as the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico. And this is not a sport confined to major stadiums. In towns across Nicaragua, you will find a dirt field, a couple of worn-out gloves, and children playing after school, dreaming that they might one day reach the major leagues just like Dennis Martinez. So the next time you automatically associate Central America with soccer, remember that in Nicaragua, the bat and ball beat the soccer ball every time. Fact number 7. The poet who transformed the Spanish language. This fact is different from everything we have covered so far because it is not about nature or sports. It is about literature. Nicaragua gave the Spanish-speaking world one of the most important poets in its entire history, Rubén Darío. His full name was Félix Rubén García Sarmiento, and he was born on January 18, 1867, in a small town called Metapa. Today, that town is known as Ciudad Darío in his honor. Rubén Darío did far more than write beautiful poems. He became the leading figure of an entire literary movement known as Modernismo, which permanently changed the way poetry was written in Spanish. Before Darío, Spanish-language poetry largely followed the paths established in Spain. But with the publication of his book Azul in 1888, Darío reversed that relationship. For the first time, Latin America was showing Spanish poetry a new direction, not the other way around. Major writers such as Antonio Machado and Ramón del Valle Inclán openly acknowledged his influence. Darío lived the life of a tireless traveler. He spent time in El Salvador, Chile, Argentina, Spain, and France, working as a journalist and diplomat while carrying with him an extraordinary ability to turn simple words into music. He died on February 6, 1916, in León, the same city where he had grown up. Today, alongside figures such as Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, he is still regarded as one of the most influential poets in the history of Latin America. What makes his story even more remarkable is that Darío began writing as a child. He published his first sonnet at the age of 12, and by his teenage years, people across Nicaragua already knew him as the boy poet. That early brilliance, combined with a lifetime of travel and cultural exchange, allowed him to create a style no one had attempted before. So the next time you read a Spanish-language poem that plays with rhythm and sound until it feels almost musical, there is a good chance that style owes something to this Nicaraguan poet. Fact number 6. 2 cities and centuries of rivalry. Nicaragua has two colonial cities that are true architectural treasures. For centuries, their rivalry helped shape the history of the entire country, Granada and León. Granada was founded in 1524 on the shores of Lake Nicaragua and is one of the oldest colonial cities in the continental Americas. Walking through its streets feels like stepping into a postcard. Colorful facades, centuries-old churches, wooden balconies, and the famous yellow Granada Cathedral, an image that has become instantly recognizable in photographs of the country. León has a completely different energy. It is a more bohemian university city, home to a cathedral designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It is also the largest cathedral in Central America. For much of the 19th century, these cities were not merely competing over which one was more beautiful. They became the headquarters of Nicaragua's two main political factions, the conservatives in Granada and the liberals in León. The rivalry became so intense that it helped trigger civil wars. It even influenced the decision to make Managua, the city located roughly between them, the national capital, preventing either Granada or León from defeating the other in the struggle for power. Today, that historic rivalry is far friendlier, almost like the banter between supporters of two opposing sports teams. But the architectural legacy of both cities remains intact. Walking through Granada at night, with its illuminated cobblestone streets and horse-drawn carriages passing in front of the cathedral, can feel like traveling several centuries into the past. León, with its university atmosphere and murals recalling the country's political struggles, has a cultural energy that attracts artists and students from all over Nicaragua. If you ever visit, you will hear people from Granada defend their city as the most beautiful in the country, while people from León insist theirs has more history and a deeper cultural soul. Which city do you think would win that argument? Let me know in the comments. And if you are enjoying these facts as much as I am, subscribe so the algorithm keeps bringing you more journeys through countries like this one. Fact number 5. 1 in 10 Nicaraguans lives abroad. This fact concerns something that has profoundly shaped Nicaragua's social reality in recent years: migration. An estimated 10% of Nicaraguans currently live outside their home country, with most settling in two main destinations: Costa Rica, Nicaragua's neighbor to the south, and the United States. Unlike several other Central American countries, where the United States is almost always the primary destination, Nicaragua's migration story is different. Because of its proximity, shared language, and decades of labor ties, Costa Rica has traditionally been the leading destination for hundreds of thousands of Nicaraguans. This migration is not new. For decades, Nicaraguans have left their country in search of economic opportunity. In recent years, those movements have intensified because of the country's political and social situation. What is especially striking is the economic impact of the diaspora. The money Nicaraguan migrants send home to their families, known as remittances, represents roughly 1/3 of the country's gross domestic product. In other words, an enormous share of Nicaragua's economy directly depends on income earned abroad and sent back to parents, children, and siblings who remained at home. Walk through almost any Nicaraguan town at the end of the month and you can see the real weight of this fact. Lines outside money transfer offices, homes built with money sent by a son or daughter in San Jose or Miami, and small businesses launched with funds wired from overseas. Nicaraguans are also estimated to account for close to 9% of Costa Rica's population. Many work in agriculture, construction, or domestic services, supporting both the Costa Rican economy and their own families back in Nicaragua. It is an economy sustained in large part by the people who had to leave so they could help those who stayed behind. Fact number 4. The lake with sharks. Get ready for one of those facts that sounds like an urban legend but is completely real. Sharks live in Lake Coquibolca, also known as Lake Nicaragua. Yes, sharks swimming in fresh water, inside a lake far from the open ocean. It is the largest lake in Central America, covering more than 3,000 square miles, or over 8,000 square kilometers. For more than a century, people believed it contained a completely unique shark species found nowhere else in the world. Modern science revealed something even more astonishing. These are not an isolated species, they are actual bull sharks, the same species found in the Caribbean Sea. These animals make an almost unbelievable journey. They enter from the Caribbean and swim nearly 125 miles upstream through the San Juan River before reaching the lake. Most shark species could not survive the transition from saltwater to freshwater because their bodies would fail. But bull sharks possess a biological ability known as osmoregulation. When they detect a drop in the water's salinity, their kidneys change how they function, retaining vital salts instead of releasing them. This allows the sharks to live comfortably in the lake for long periods. So although they are no longer considered a species unique to the lake, Lake Nicaragua remains one of the world's most remarkable places to find sharks living in freshwater, alongside sawfish and other marine species that entered by the same route. Scientific study of these animals dates back to 1877. Researchers were so amazed by them that the government eventually issued a postage stamp featuring a shark as a symbol of national identity. So if you ever see a photograph of someone fishing nervously along the shore of this lake, now you know exactly why. Fact number 3. The island made from 2 volcanoes. Inside that same shark-filled lake lies one of the most spectacular landscapes in the Americas, Ometepe Island. Its name comes from Nahuatl and literally means 2 hills. The name could not be more accurate because the island is formed by 2 volcanoes rising directly out of the water and connected by a narrow isthmus of land. According to experts, it is the only island on Earth formed in exactly this way: 2 complete volcanoes inside a freshwater lake. The first is Concepcion, which rises 5,282 feet or 1,610 meters above sea level. It remains active today, with its most recent eruption recorded in 2010. The second is Madeiras. It is slightly lower at 4,573 feet, or 1,394 meters, and is considered extinct. Hidden inside its crater is a lagoon surrounded by mist and tropical forest. The entire island covers about 107 square miles, or 276 square kilometers. UNESCO designated it a biosphere reserve because of its extraordinary biodiversity and the pre-Columbian archaeological remains still found there, some of which are thousands of years old. When the first Spanish explorers reached Lake Cocibolca, they reportedly thought they were looking at the sea because the body of water appeared so enormous. They realized their mistake only after watching their horses drink from it without any problem. Today, thousands of people take ferries from the mainland each year to walk among banana and plantain groves, climb one of the 2 volcanoes, or simply stare at what looks like 2 giant mountains floating in the middle of a lake. Around 42,000 people live on the island, spread across small towns such as Moyogalpa and Altagracia. For many residents, everyday life revolves around plantain farming and tourism. Visitors come searching for that unique combination of volcanoes, water, and tranquility found nowhere else in the world. Fact number 2. The crop that sustains rural Nicaragua. Now let us talk about coffee, one of the most important pillars of Nicaragua's economy. In 2025, coffee exports generated more than $918 million for the country, with total volume exceeding 3 million quintals. Most of that coffee is grown in the cool, mountainous highlands of regions such as Matagalpa and Jinotega, where the climate and elevation give Nicaraguan beans a quality that can be tasted in the cup and rewarded on the international market. Behind those numbers is an enormous human story. Around 51,000 Nicaraguan families depend directly on coffee farming, and the industry supports more than 136,000 direct jobs, not including the many indirect jobs across the supply chain, from harvesting to export. Europe has become the main buyer. Roughly 42% of Nicaragua's coffee ends up in European cups. In recent years, high-quality Nicaraguan coffee has earned extraordinary international recognition, with special lots of the geisha variety selling at auction for more than $100 per pound, prices that compete with some of the most exclusive coffees in the world. For farming families in Nicaragua's northern mountains, every coffee harvest represents far more than an export product. It can mean sending children to school, repairing a family home, or supporting an entire rural community for another year. International recognition continues to grow. At the online specialty coffee auction, known as the Cup of Excellence, a Nicaraguan geisha lot achieved a record price per pound, a figure that would have sounded impossible to local producers only a few years earlier. The next time you drink a cup of coffee, there is a real chance those beans were grown in the mountains of Nicaragua. Fact number 1. The country where Spanish can feel like a foreign language. We have reached the fact I promised you at the beginning, the one that sounds so unbelievable that many people do not accept it until they research it themselves. The entire eastern half of Nicaragua, known as the Caribbean Coast, is divided into two autonomous regions, the North Caribbean Coast Autonomous Region and the South Caribbean Coast Autonomous Region. Across this enormous stretch of territory, Spanish is not the mother tongue for a significant share of the population. It is a language many people learn later, often only after they begin school, almost as if it were a foreign language. Several languages with centuries of history coexist in this region. There is Mosquito, the most widely spoken indigenous language in Nicaragua, used as the primary language of daily life by tens of thousands of people. There is Nicaraguan Creole English, or Creole, an English-based Creole spoken by Afro-descendant coastal communities whose history reflects centuries of contact with British and Caribbean settlers and traders. There is Garifuna, spoken by Garifuna communities around Pearl Lagoon. And there are Mayangna and Rama, two even older indigenous languages that survive today in increasingly small communities, while facing a genuine risk of disappearing. To understand the scale of this cultural difference, consider Bluefields, the capital of the South Caribbean Coast Autonomous Region. There, you will find people who identify as mestizo, as well as Creole, Mosquito, Garifuna, and Rama communities, each with its own language, music, food, and religious traditions. On Nicaragua's Pacific side, where Managua, Granada, and León are located, most people grow up speaking Spanish naturally from birth. But on the other side of the country, many children grow up hearing and speaking Mosquito or Creole first. Later, they learn Spanish as a second language at school, with a teacher and textbooks, much as an English speaker might study Spanish or French. This difference is not a cultural accident. It is the result of a completely different history. While Nicaragua's Pacific region was colonized directly by Spain, the Caribbean coast remained under British influence for far longer. It had its own Mosquito Kingdom, its own relationship with Caribbean trade, and an identity that never fully merged with the rest of the country. Even today, the autonomy laws governing these regions officially recognize several languages alongside Spanish. Creole, Garifuna, Rama, Mayangna, and Mosquito all hold special status within the territory, something that does not occur anywhere else in Nicaragua. But this cultural wealth also faces a real danger. Languages such as Rama and some Mayangna varieties have fewer and fewer young speakers. Community leaders themselves acknowledge that Spanish is gradually advancing and replacing these ancestral languages, even inside their own communities. So when someone tells you that Nicaragua is simply a Spanish-speaking country, you have to explain that the phrase captures only half of the real story. The other half has its own languages, its own rhythm, and its own way of seeing the world. It remains alive in the 21st century, proudly resisting the language that arrived from outside. And that brings us to the end of our journey through a country that looks small on the map but contains an extraordinary number of contrasts. A lake with sharks, an island formed by two volcanoes, a poet who transformed the Spanish language, a canyon hidden from the wider world for centuries, and an entire half of the country where Spanish itself may be learned rather than inherited. With 7 million people spread across coffee-growing mountains, colonial cities, and a Caribbean coast moving to its own rhythm, Nicaragua proves that a country can be small in size and still be immense in identity. Nicaragua is one of those places that reminds us how geography and culture can hide extraordinary surprises, even from people who think they already know Latin America well. If you enjoyed this journey, subscribe, and I will see you in the next country, one that may surprise you just as much, or even more.